So, I was looking back at my perfect season video I made nearly 3 years ago, right at the start of lockdown, where I chose my favourite episode in each episode slot across the whole show and made a season out of them. Making my own season or DVD release of the show is something I've been interested in doing for a while now, but didn't want to just repeat that video with a couple updates. So, I decided to do something similar, but with two major changes. First is that this video will apply just to the first 5 seasons, and if it does well, I might make more for the other eras. And second, the rule about each episode having to be in the episode slot it was in its season is now gone. These are my favourite 26-ish episodes from the classic era, in an order that I selected. The rule about having to include all parts of a multi-part story still applies, however, so this has led to some interesting decisions about whether to go for a great episode that connects to an okay episode, or just go for 2 great episodes but not quite as good as the one you're leaving out. It has also led to some purely subjective decisions about whether or not an episode is part of a 2 or 3 part story, or if the episodes are linked but can exist on their own. When it came to choosing the episode order, I tried to stick to these 3 rules. Rule 1. Episodes that have to be after another. This applies mostly to 2-part stories, where part 1 obviously has to come first, or episodes where a character is introduced have to come before other episodes they're in. If it's just a cameo or background appearance, that's fine. I mean, it literally happened in Season 1 with James. But if they are referenced either by a character or by the narrator, or if they play an important role in the plot, it has to come after they're introduced. I also count purely visual stuff, like Teignmouth being 6 or 7 births, or Henry being in his old shape, as not mattering. If it affects the plot, or is referenced, then I have to take it into account, but if it's purely a visual thing, then I can disregard it. Also, with 2-part stories, if they don't have to be immediately after each other, there's a good chance I've got them a long way apart. Percy Runs Away has to be immediately after Trouble in the Shed. I guess you could have another episode there, but it would have to be one that only has Thomas, Edward and Percy in, and there aren't any episodes like that I can think of. But an episode like The Flying Kipper doesn't have to be immediately after Cole. Cole obviously has to come first, but the length of time between the 2 episodes is never specified, so there could be a load of episodes in that gap, if you ignore the fact that Henry's in his new shape, which, as purely a visual thing, I can do. Rule 2. Character arcs. If I look at a bunch of episodes that I chose for the season, and see that one character has the opportunity to have a bit of an arc, I included that. For example, if I do the Brenner era, and if I picked Pouty James and All in Vain, it wouldn't make sense to have All in Vain before Pouty James. In Pouty James, his growing up, maturing arc starts, and in All in Vain, it continues. An example of how ignoring this can go very wrong is in Season 21. Diesel seems to improve for the better in Springtime for Diesel, and then in the very next episode is back to his old ways. If those 2 episodes were flipped, it would have been so much better. I don't mind characters forgetting an arc, as long as there's a long time between them and/or there's a reason to forget it. Gordon got taught lessons so many times in the Railway series, and kept forgetting them, but it worked because as time went on, they got rarer and rarer, with larger lengths of time between them, and as the fastest engine on Sodor and puller of the Express, he definitely has reasons to forget his lesson and go back to his pompous ways. I didn't focus too much on character arcs, but if there was an opportunity there, or something that didn't make sense to have them in one order, I paid attention to it. Rule 3. Seasons of the year. I tried to have this season take place over the course of 2 years, starting with spring of one year and ending with winter of the following year. That didn't particularly work, as there are loads of episodes where you just can't tell what season it is. I only had one winter episode, so I could only represent one of the winters, and the episode that I felt like had to be the finale was probably a summer episode. But for the most part, I tried to follow the 2 years, cycling through the seasons policy. And just a quick disclaimer, while I really wish this didn't have to be said, this is all just my opinion. None of this is fact. With that out of the way, let's dive into my Allcroft era fantasy season. Episode 1, Bulldog. Bulldog is my favourite episode from Season 4, so naturally found its way into this season. The scene with Duke hanging onto Falcon is still great on every rewatch. Even though I have got a season opener in this season, I decided to put that further down for character reasons, which left no real good options for a season opener. I went for this one because it is a pretty early episode in its season. Episode 2, You Can't Win. Another great Duke episode, this time pairing him with Stuart. Putting it straight after Bulldog made sense, as it's at the same time, at the same place, and it came after it in its season. Episode 3, Wrong Road. I love this episode. The scene in the station has some of the best atmosphere of the whole show. I put it early on because, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big an episode, and while in the book, this has links to the next story, which, let's face it, you all know is going to be on here, in the TV episodes, the link doesn't really exist, so they can be a long way apart. Episodes 4 and 5, Trouble in the Shed and Percy Runs Away. It was around here my rules started to get me thinking a bit. With me solely picking my favourite 26 episodes, Percy Runs Away was in it, but Trouble in the Shed wasn't. That created a question of whether to include Trouble in the Shed or leave out Percy Runs Away. I decided to keep them in because Trouble in the Shed is still a very good episode, and Percy Runs Away is definitely up there among the best in my opinion. You can argue that Tenders and Turntables should also be included, but I thought that these two episodes work without the first part. Yes, you are thrown into it at the start of Trouble in the Shed, but that happens with Escape in the Railway series. In my view, Tenders and Turntables needs Trouble in the Shed after it, and that in turn needs Percy Runs Away after it. But Trouble in the Shed doesn't need Tenders and Turntables before it. And for those reasons, Trouble in the Shed and Percy Runs Away are in my episode 4 and 5 slots. Episode 6, Cranky Bugs. This could have been the season opener, but I moved it down here for character reasons. There are loads of episodes where Henry, Gordon and James get too big for themselves and get knocked down a peg, so I feel some episodes are needed to bring them back up in order for it to repeat. This episode clearly shows Cranky having at least a higher opinion of the big engines, so yeah, I count that. Also, a great episode, introduces probably the best non-Audrey character, definitely one of them at least. Episode 7, Duck Takes Charge. A great introduction to Duck, and another story with the big engines getting knocked down a peg. I wasn't a huge fan of this coming so soon after Percy became the station pilot, but yeah, this did need to come quite early. Episode 8, Cold. An episode that I love. Henry's arc early on is one of the best in the show, with all his troubled past and shortcomings. Has to be quite early, since after about halfway through season 1, in the Allcroft era at least, there are no stories where Henry is ill. Episode 9, Old Iron. An amazing episode with a great runaway scene. An episode that humbles James a lot and features one of Edward's finest moments. Was fairly early in its season, so it goes fairly early here. Episode 10, Henry's Forest. Okay, so my headcanon is Henry's Forest comes during the period where Henry uses special cold. Obviously, you have to retcon Henry being in his new shape, but as I said at the start of the video, as that's a purely visual thing and not important to the story or is even referenced, I'm fine with that. You also have to retcon when the flying kipper happens to be after Toby arrived, so this probably wouldn't work and doesn't make much sense, but hey, it's my headcanon, I can do what I want. In my mind, it makes sense that Henry may feel insecure during the period where he has to use special cold, and so having a place that's special to him and makes him feel better makes sense. Episode 11, Bowled Out. A great episode. The scene where Duncan Stepney pulling the train is one of my favourites in the whole show. The only Stepney story on here, so a very isolated story that could almost go anywhere. I put it here just because. Episode 12, James and the Trouble with Trees. The first autumn has started. A really great episode with a really tense moment and shows just how far Thomas's character has come since season 1. It's just a shame they were inconsistent with it during the Ghislaine era and then threw it away completely in the hit era. Episode 13, Put Upon Percy. A great Percy episode, the avalanche scene being really intense. Another episode that feels quite autumny. I don't remember whether they stated that it was autumn or not, but to me at least, it feels like it. Episode 14, Toby and the Floods. The last autumn episode in this batch. This is probably still my favourite season 5 episode and my second favourite in the whole show. You can make the argument that Toby is out of character, but in a situation like this, I think he can definitely be excused for being a bit scared. And they actually acknowledged that they could die, which was already quite rare, and would become even more rare after this season. Episode 15, The Flying Kipper. A fantastic episode, many people's favourite from season 1, and for very good reason. Beautiful visuals, amazing music, and a great crash. It felt like it was finally time to let Henry stop using Welsh Cold and give him his new shape. Also, it's the only winter episode in this season, so it had to come after the first batch of autumn episodes. Episode 12, Whistles and Sneezes. Unlike Cold to Flying Kipper, which could have had ages between them, this is strongly implied to come very soon after the end of Flying Kipper. Another great episode with Gordon again being rude and then getting what he deserves, and then Henry Sneeze being one of the most iconic moments in the series. Episode 17, Off the Rails. It's no secret that Gordon always has the best episodes. Even in the hit era, where a lot of the characters and episodes were dumbed down and made extremely formulaic, Gordon's episodes were often the shining lights. When you take the character with the best episodes and give them to competent writers, the end result is inevitably gold. Another one of the standout episodes from season 1 goes here as the Flying Kipper is referenced. Episode 18, Escape. One of the most well-loved episodes in the whole show. This episode both adds and removes things from the Railway series story. While it would have been cool to see the stuff they left out, the scenes they added in were very good as well. I'd argue that the TV episode is the better, well-rounded story, but I do prefer the Railway series, partly at least because it goes into more detail about Oliver on the run. Episode 19, Toad Stands By. I did wonder whether or not to count this as a two-parter of Oliver Owns Up, but they give enough context at the start of this episode for me to count it on its own. Besides, they were in 2 different seasons in the actual show. A great episode based around Oliver and Toad's early days on the island. Episode 20, Busy Going Backwards. I love this episode. It features a great runaway with a unique end crash. I decided to put the 3 Oliver and Toad episodes together because that's just what felt right to do. Episode 21, A Better View for Gordon. This is a fantastic episode. Even among all the craziness of Season 5, this still manages to stand out as one of the better ones. Also has one of the most inventive crashes, and actually shows it's having consequences. While it was early on in its season, as it is quite a big scale episode, I like it going later. Episode 22, Toby's Tightrope. The start of the second batch of autumn episodes. Again, I briefly considered whether or not this counted as a 2-parter with Mavis, but they are 2 stories with a vague link. One of Toby's finest moments, along with the floods, and all round a great watch. Episode 23, Edward's Exploit. You all knew this was coming. Edward's finest moment and my all-time favourite episode. The Railway series story is obviously better, as there was only so much damage they could afford to do to Edward's prop, but that doesn't mean the TV episode isn't still amazing. This had to come late in the season, first as it's the best character's best moment, but also because it's the moment where the big engines all finally gain respect for Edward. I don't mind episodes where they slip back into their old ways, as long as they're rare and there's some reason why they might be particularly moody. However, over the course of one season, I don't think there's enough time for an episode where Edward finally gets everyone's respect, only for them to forget that. A couple of seasons, sure. One season, no. Episode 24, Duncan Gets Spooked. Another standout from Season 5, and that's because of the mystery aspect. No one knows whether or not the story was true. There's enough there to leave the option open that it might be, but also enough there to dismiss it as entirely made up. One of the best spooky episodes of all time. Episode 25, Rusty and the Boulder. Might be a bit of a controversial pick, but I just love this episode. It's one of those episodes like Jet Engine that's unrealistic, but definitely not unbelievable. The scene where Boulder chases the engines round is an extremely memorable scene. And again, there's just enough there to hint that there were supernatural elements at play, just as Rusty suspected, which again helps with its memorability. Episode 26, All at Sea. I wanted to end with a winter or autumn episode, but this has got such a nice season finale feel about it, so I couldn't not use it. It's definitely the best non-Audrey Season 3 episode, and it's an extremely popular one. It has a great message, but the moral isn't shoved down your throat like the later seasons are. And the ending scene and closing shot are so wonderful, I couldn't not have it as the season finale. And that's my Allcroft fantasy season. By the rules of this season, there were several episodes that were close to making it, but had to be left out. Grandpuff and A Close Shave were both in my top 26 episodes, but Sleeping Beauty, Pop Goes to Diesel and Dirty Work dragged them down to the point where they couldn't justify taking another episode spot. Stepney Gets Lost was in possession of the 26th spot, but got knocked out to allow Trouble in the Sheds to come in. If I had included all of Grandpuff, Sleeping Beauty, Pop Goes to Diesel, Dirty Work and A Close Shave, the ones that would have been left out would have been Henry's Forest, Toby's Tightrope, You Can't Win, Duck Takes Charge, and Wrong Road. If I had decided to leave out Trouble in the Shed and Percy Runs Away, either Time for Trouble or Haunted Henry would have come in along with Stepney Gets Lost. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and comment down below what your favourite Allcroft era episodes are, what you agreed with me on, what you disagreed with me on, and if you have one, what's your fantasy Allcroft season? I have constantly said at the end of every video that my long absence is over, and I'll be back to making regular videos again. And every time, that hasn't happened. So, I won't say it this time. Maybe then, it will actually happen. I do have a lot of video ideas that I want to make, so all I can say is just wait and see what happens next. But, knowing my track record, that probably won't be until about 2027.